6 blocks away from Trent Vandermeulen's McMansion, a delivery man sped down Cascade Road on a motorized unicycle toward Harry Baumgarten's McMansion to drop off a pizza. The man was upset, ordered pizza with chocolate frosting on it. More importantly, ordered pizza with sentient pepperoni. Both items had devogued long ago, and it unnerved the delivery man to think that somebody thought they were being cool when in reality their fashion sense hinged on ignorance or some kind of retrograde, I want to be kitschy wistfulness. You imagine the creatively foul-mouthed ways he might tell the client off when he reached his destination. A black flapping blur whooshed out of the darkness and tackled the delivery man. He flew into somebody's AstroTurf yard and tumbled into an out-of-season nativity scene, knocking the plastic players over like bowling pins. The unicycle fell onto its side and screeched across the street in a cloud of sparks. The pizza carton leapt straight into the air, flipping end over end, and landed on its backside with a resounding smack. For a moment, everything was still, silent. Then the top of the pizza carton snapped open and the pepperonis inside began to squeak and gibber. They crawled out of the morass of frosting like creatures from a swamp and inched across the asphalt, twitching, trying to shake the frosting from their hides. A Liston knife glinted in the light of a street lamp. Mr. Blankety Blank fell on the pepperonis. Hacking madly and indiscriminately, he sliced them into smaller parts. The pepperonis squealed. They bled, but they didn't die. Their residual fragments became individuals with minds of their own. All the killer effectively did was hurt them. No matter how small the cut, he couldn't kill them. Even a hair-sized slice of pepperoni formed its own personality. As promised in the pizza shop's well-known schizurtial, only the pot can perish the pepperoni, which is to say only human stomach acid could put them to death. Quote, I didn't want to hurt them, I only wanted to kill them. David Berkowitz, serial killer. Billy Ray Royerson entered the kitchen and chewed on his thumb and observed the swaying backside of a bent-over Rosie the Robot cleaning a patch of dirt off the thermal acrylic kitchen floor, and shortly he began to contemplate all the places he had been and all the money he had made and all the women he had taken advantage of and all the potential bastards he had fathered. And it felt good to stand there in his kitchen and be himself, this man, this maestro, this middle-aged dynamo. And then a serial killer strolled into the kitchen, dribbling his wife's severed head like a basketball, shooting it into the sink for a three-pointer. And when Billy Ray saw his wife's round, accusing eyes, he roared and hurled knives at the killer one after the other. He pulled them out of an hardy block of oak with a metallic unsheathing sound, butcher's knives, dinner knives, Ginsu knives, machetes, but nothing hit its target, and 10 seconds later the killer stood over him, pulling 2 thumbs out of his eye sockets. Quote, people commonly travel the world over to see rivers and mountains, new stars, garish birds, freak fish, grotesque breed of human. They fall into an animal stupor that gapes at existence, and they think they have seen something. Soren Kierkegaard, philosopher. They called him Defenestration Jones. His family called him DJ Windowpane. By day, he worked as a local retail psycho-critic, traveling from strip mall to strip mall and writing personality profiles on salespeople for publication in the Quiggling Bean, the Bulgaria's leading newspaper. By night, he worked as a husband and a father for a wife and kids who liked to make fun of him for being a local retail psycho-critic, as well as a closet homosexual and, above all, a window jumper. It happened about once a month. The synapses in DJ Windowpane's brain misfired, causing him to march up the stairway of his mansion to the 5th floor, open the window at the end of the hallway, and leap out of it, and leap out of it, and leap out of it. The drop wasn't short. At the bottom, though, a brambly, defenestration-friendly bonsai bush broke his fall and springboarded him across the lawn. Then DJ Windowpane got up, dusted himself off, and marched back upstairs for another jump. And he kept jumping until fatigue or a broken bone prohibited him from jumping again. That night, Mr. Blankety Blank passed by the Joneses' McMansion during one of these defenestrative spectacles. He paused on the sidewalk. He stared. DJ Windowpane's family and a few neighbors stood in the yard looking up at him as he announced his 16th jump of the evening and took the plunge. He leapt too far out, missed the bush, landed on his feet, and sprained an ankle. "You stupid idiot," shouted Mrs. Jones. DJ Windowpane got to his feet and limped back to the house, grimacing in pain. His children oscillated between laughing and crying. The neighbors took photos and shot footage. A few minutes later, the game hater made the scene. He regarded Mr. Blankety Blank suspiciously, wondering if he was a new superhero. He contemplated the stranger, he complimented the stranger on his outfit in hopes of starting a conversation. Mr. Blankety Blank ignored him. The game hater shrugged and approached Mrs. Jones. "Anything I can do, ma'am?" He crossed his arms over a putty padded chest. Mrs. Jones looked the game hater up and down. She winced in disgust. What are you, in third grade? The game hater felt naked. He felt like he did as a boy when he got a boner in school between classes and had to walk down the hallway with a stack of books shielding his crotch. No doubt some of you know what that is. His giant plastic grin wavered, but he maintained composure, reassuring himself again and again, don't hate the player, don't hate the player, don't hate the player. DJ Windowpane jumped a 17th time, landed on his head, and broke his neck. Now you need a new neck, screamed his wife. The children threw themselves to the ground in an attempt to imitate their father. The neighbors threw themselves to the ground in an attempt to imitate the children. Mr. Blankety Blank disappeared in the shadow of a fluid, fluttering Veronica. A couple more pages. Quote, you'll never get me. I'll kill again, then you'll have another long trial, and then I'll do it again. Henry Brisbane, serial killer. Mr. Vandermeulen listened to the sound of the dead line and told the phone to hang up. Unable to think of anything else to do, he went to bed. In the bathroom, he popped a brush bug into his mouth and stared at his image in the mirror while it cleaned his teeth. His cheeks poked out as if jabbed from the insides with toothpicks. He bent over, spit the brush bug into the sink, and shuddered at the sight of another reflection in the mirror. He turned and faced the intruder. Who are you? What's that? Is that some sort of sci-fi weapon? You can't bring a sci-fi weapon into my home. Mr. Blankety Blank aimed the scramble gun at his victim. Mr. Vandermeulen turned inside out, his organs and bones pinned to his skin suit like tails on a donkey. Mr. Blankety Blank used a steak knife to slice off his liver and kidneys. He went downstairs to the kitchen, put a frying pan on the stove, and rummaged through the refrigerator. He took out 3 bottles of marinade. Each was a different brand and a different flavor. He regarded the marinades one at a time, uncertain of how to proceed. Quote, how shall I marinate my tenderloin this evening? Albert Fish, serial killer. Dr. Skidmore Pacholsky put on a devil's costume, red face, goatee, horns, cape, barbed tail, hooves, pitchfork. Halloween wasn't until Friday. Henrietta Pacholsky choked on a peach pit when her husband snuck up behind her and playfully jabbed her in the ass with a pitchfork. He tried to do the Heimlich maneuver. It didn't work. Knowing she was about to die, she threw a fountain pen at Skidmore out of spite. The pen struck him in the eye and all of its ink unloaded into his brain. The couple hit the floor at the same time. Mr. Blankety Blank appeared 3 hours later. He removed the pen from Dr. Pacholsky's eye and wrote a grocery list on one of his gloves. Then he dragged the Pacholskys' corpses into the yard, disemboweled them, and formulated another message on their garage door with a fresh coat of blood. Quote, probably the toughest time in anyone's life is when you have to murder a loved one because they're the devil. Emo Phillips, stand up for me. A line of children stretched out from the window of an ice cream truck with a discarded umbilical cord. Rutger Van Traub cut in line, making at least 10 children behind him cry. He waited 15 seconds, grew impatient, and muscled his way to the front of the line, nudging children out of the way. The ice cream man looked at him disapprovingly and said, the only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. 1 popsicle, please, replied Mr. Van Traub. Great. Tears welled up in the street and flowed into the gutters. Mr. Van Traub shifted the BMW Futique into kit mode and told it to take him home. He has a flashy, futuristic BMW. The red Cylon eye on the grill illuminated and roamed back and forth. An old-fashioned loudspeaker emerged from the roof of the car and blasted the Knight Rider theme song. The residents of Quiggle Estates covered their ears, shouted obscenities, and hurled pieces of yard art at the BMW Futique as it passed them by. Mr. Van Traub had just finished his popsicle when he passed by the Pacholskys' house. A crowd had gathered outside. People in robes and business suits commingled and ran in circles. The sirens of police cars, ambulances, news vans flickered, blared, and beeped. There were screams. There were anime eyes. He told the car to be quiet and park. He got out. He walked towards the house on his tiptoes, peeking over the heads of his neighbors. The policeman stopped him. What's going on? Said Mr. Van Traub. The policeman sighed. He gestured at the Pacholskys' garage. Mr. Van Traub squinted and tried to stand taller on his tiptoes. His calves hurt. I can't see anything. Fortunately, the policeman was built like a professional wrestler. He walked behind Mr. Van Traub, picked him up by the shoulders, and held him there for a count of 10. He saw it now, scrawled across the garage in giant letters. The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. The policeman set Mr. Van Traub down. Mr. Van Traub looked at the policeman and shook his head. You ain't much if you ain't Dutch, he said. Quote, blank, 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 blankety blank. Jack the Ripper, serial killer. The end.